Read Job chapter 1, verse 1 this morning. Job chapter 1, verse 1. We read there in God's Word, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and turned away from evil." You know, Job appeared to have the same theology as his three friends who came to console him. The four held to the doctrine of exact moral retribution, where God gave out punishment or reward according to whether a person was wicked or whether they were righteous. God, however, is the sole cause behind the workings of His creation, and God does not make mistakes. Job had a problem. He knew that his suffering was not because of any sin of his. His problem was a religious one. So he asked the question that many today are asking: why? Why is all this befallen me? Job lived in Uz. His religious character was impeccable. He was blameless. He feared God, which means he had a great respect for God. He shunned evil. He had great wealth. Large herds of cattle and land he owned. He had a large family, all indicating wealth in that day and age. He was the spiritual leader of his family. Now, after God called Satan's attention to Job, Satan raised the question, does Job fear God for nothing? Satan then put out a challenge. Told God, but stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely cuss you to your face. God gave Satan permission to touch all Job had, but not Job himself. We have to learn here that when given free rein, Satan works fast. 4 catastrophes hit Job in quick succession. What was Job's reaction? Well, verse 22 tells us that in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. So, Satan's first attack on Job failed. And again, Satan was among those who presented themselves to God. And when God reminded Satan that Job still held fast his integrity, Satan made a second challenge that would be even more personal by attacking Job's body. God permitted Satan to attack Job's body, but He did not allow Satan to take Job's life. Job was attacked with painful sores, and he sat in the street among ashes and scraped himself with a piece of broken pottery. It was at this point his own wife, the one he should have been able to depend on the most in all the world, she encouraged him to renounce God and die. Verse 10 tells us that in all this did not Job sin with his lips. So prolonged and intense was Job's suffering that 3 friends came from afar to comfort him. They sat with him on the ground for 7 days in silence. Out of the friends, Eliphaz was the mystic of the group. He felt his past experiences put him in direct contact with God. Bildad was a traditionalist, a scholar, wise in the wisdom of the ancients. Zophar was a hard dogmatic, untroubled by doubts about his theology. Now, in the thinking of these 3 men, and keep in mind, I said in the mind of these 3 men, God rules the affairs of people with justice so exact that it is always well with the righteous and not with the wicked. Job broke the silence by expressing his longing for death. He cursed the day he was born, we see in verses 1 through 10. Job's friends had no room in their thinking for secondary causes. In their mind, God is the sole cause of all that happens. Therefore, in their thinking, everything that happens in the lives of mankind is either rewarded or punished. So, if Job would accept his suffering and throw himself on God's mercy, God would come to him and deliver him. In their mind, Job must see himself as a sinner. But we know this did not work. Job knew and believed in God better than his friends did. Job maintained his innocence and could not understand why he was being treated this way. His friends came to realize that they were dealing with one whose pure and lofty thoughts of God made little impression. Job dismissed his friends. In reply to Bildad's second speech, Job, moved by a leap of faith, rose to high levels of hope, and he rose out of despair. Having failed in their attempts, they charged Job with every possible sin of a rich man. Job again stressed his innocence. The purpose of God's words to Job from the whirlwind was to rebuke Job for his presumptions and to heal him from his woes. God asked Job questions that had but one humbling answer. And what was that answer? I do not know. Job, overwhelmed by his smallness before God, said, I lay my hand upon my mouth. Job realized then that his knowledge of God was limited, academic, and speculative. He then repented in dust and ashes. Now, some have claimed that this ending spoils the story. Viewed superficially, it would seem so. However, the ending of this story does two things. It shows that the three friends were rebuked for their inflexible orthodoxy and did not speak correctly about God. God is in control of all of His creation, but unlike Job's friends, we need to understand that God cares about His creation. He cares about you and I. He loves us so much that He gave His only begotten Son to die on that cross at Calvary for you and I. So for the Christian, the solution to suffering is religious, not speculative. It's a heart solution, not a mind solution. We've got to be focused on God, but we have to be real with God. In closing today, let me say, if you're suffering, remember Job's story. Learn from him. Ask God to renew your heart. Ask God to strengthen your faith in Him. And then trust in God to take care of whatever it is that troubles you. God will, God can. Trust Him.